Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. Markets, scandals, finance, and more scandals. Let's bring in Stacy Herbert to get the latest. Stacy, hello there.
Hi, Max. First headline, scandalous.
Yeah.
Fed says homes built with Chinese drywall must be completely gutted. So, you know, that whole housing boom centered mostly around Florida. Well, it turns out that a lot of the homes were built with Chinese drywall, which gives off a foul smell. It smells like rotten eggs.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently they're dangerous. So now the Consumer Product Safety Commission in America has ordered all these homes to gut themselves entirely.
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got some Chinese drywall right here. Actually, it was in Florida over the weekend, and I picked up some of this Chinese drywall. And it looks surprisingly like styrofoam, but no, this is, building-grade material direct from Beijing. And apparently it gives off a real... Here's some more Chinese materials that they use to build condominiums down there in Florida. It looks like bubble wrap, but it's actually sort of... Oh, here's some more. Oh, yeah, this is, I think, some of the towers that they're building down there in Miami.
Well, speaking of regulators, here's another headline. Prozac pilots may fly as FAA drops ban on medicines. So pilots have been forbidden for the last few decades to take antidepressants. But the FAA is saying now that the previous ban applied to those antidepressants that cause you to be drowsy. The new generation, they're okay to take. And I'm going to read you some of the side effects of Prozac and Zoloft. Suicidal thoughts or behavior and hallucinations.
Yeah.
So I thought, it gave new meaning to that. Remember that Captain Sullenberger who crashed the U.S. Airways, who landed it into the Hudson River in America? Well, what if these guys are having hallucinations? They're seeing like pigs fly. At least Sullenberger was really like dodging real geese who flew into the plane.
Yeah, I think the stewardesses need the antidepressants to deal with all the passenger section there who are deprived of the oxygen. They don't circulate the oxygen anymore. They just have it all breathing the same thing for hours and hours and hours. They get hallucinations just from breathing each other's, sputum.
I have a very interesting headline here. 600-pound man pleads no contest to food scams. So this man, George Jolicoeur, 38-year-old man who is 600 pounds, and he's confined to a nursing home, has to use a breathing apparatus. But he's been committing crimes, and it goes like this. He goes into a restaurant or store and demands a refund, claiming he's been sold spoiled or defective food. But the interesting thing about it is that he seems to really have learned from Wall Street, because he's literally too big to prosecute. So the court and the justice system would have to spend too much money to airlift him and bring him, provide him with proper medical service to bring him into the court. They've done a plea bargain with him where he's pled no contest to this and does no jail time.
Well, he's too fat to obey the law.
He's too big to obey the law. So just like the giant banks who are too big to prosecute for any of the crimes they've committed because they're too big.
Yeah.
Well, he seems to have learned from them.
Oh, I get it. They're too big to fail.
Exactly.
They're too big to obey the law.
That's correct.
So this big fat man's doing the same thing. He's too fat to obey the law.
Well, it seems like it's a good idea if you want to escape the justice system.
It's all about size. Size matters.
In America.
So you want to disobey the law gets big, whether you're fat or you're a big bank.
Well, speaking of scams, here's a headline. Timothy Geithner is a sniveling scamster.
Oh, yes.
Well, you know that the Fed has ended this $1.25 trillion quantitative easing program, and people were saying, oh, we're all worried because what's going to happen? The housing market is going to start to crash again. Well, Timothy Geithner, the Treasury Department, has come up with a new plan, and that's the foreclosure prevention plan.
Oh.
Well, it turns out, according to Mike Whitney, that the plan is to slash the principal on underwater mortgages. Well, the kicker for this, for the banks and the hedge funds, when the mortgage is refinanced, it's converted into an FHA-backed loan, which provides an explicit government guarantee. So for a slight loss on the face value of the mortgage-backed security, the investors, like the investment banks and the big banks, are able to resuscitate their moribund securitizations, their MBSs, and reap hefty gains. So mortgage-backed securities are now soaring. They had dropped to basically zero, but now they're soaring again because of this new Obama-Geithner program, which again, lo and behold, is benefiting the oligarchs.
Tim Gangster, he's re-architecting the market to suit the bankers. Meanwhile, unemployment's going up. The CPI, if you strip out all the largesse given by the federal government, is down 20% year on year. Wages are going down. There's an ecological holocaust in America. There's a societal breakdown in America. But the bankers are safe because they're too big to fail. The bankers are safe. They're too big to fail. If you're big, you're innocent. If you're starving, you're guilty.
That seems unfair, doesn't it? And that takes me to the next headline. Geithner, disparity in recovery, deeply unfair. So he was interviewed on television, and he was asked about this fact that, you know, the bankers are doing so well, they're recording record profits, and yet the people are suffering dearly. Take a look at this video.
You understand that anger and frustration.
Absolutely.
When someone's out there and they haven't gotten a job that they lost 2 years ago, and they get the feeling that business on Wall Street has returned to normal, and the executives are getting big bonuses again, and they still can't pay for their mortgage or they're underwater, they say, where's the fairness in this?
Exactly, and it's not fair. It's deeply unfair, and they should be angry about it. But again, what was the choice of the president?
Well, Tim Gangster had the choice of acting ethically, number one. On a practical basis, they could have done what Sweden did in 1993. Nationalize the banks, fire all the gangsters, and then restart the cycle using ethical bankers who are not totally corrupted. But instead, they've kept the same oligarchy in place, the same fraudsters, the same banksters who are doing the exact same thing. Now, because the stock market is up in the last 6 months, of course, that's currency to use as leverage to float all kinds of new securitization and new securitization on top of securitization, new derivatives. So you see this effect, this ersatz effect, which people will assume means good. But underneath that, of course, employment is degrading and society is breaking down, and we're going to set ourselves up for another collapse, of course.
What choice did the president have? I have a little image here.
Yikes!
And not that I suggest using the guillotine, but there could have been some justice.
Yeah, but how do you apply justice to God? You know, remember Lloyd Blankfein? He said, I'm doing God's work. How do you sue God? How do you apply justice to our Heavenly Father? Lloyd Blankfein, Lord of Money, Tim Geithner, and the 12 disciples of the gods of Wall Street. There's no justice. There's no justice.
Well, because like that 600-pound man in Florida, they're too big to bring to justice.
Absolutely.
And you're too big to bring to justice brings me to the next headline. Jamie Dimon complains about demonization of mega banks.
Oh, boo-hoo.
So this is Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan. So he sent a letter out to shareholders, and he said, quote, in the current political environment, size in the business community has been demonized. But the fact is that some businesses require size in order to make necessary investments, take extraordinary risks, and provide vital support globally. He then goes on to say, and to assure America's long-term success.
Look, Jamie Dimon is a schmuck. I'll tell you why. Because what he's saying is anathema to the entire notion of free market capitalism in America that promotes competition, not monopolization, not oligarchy. How does he get away with saying this stuff? Oh, that's right. There's no financial media in America. The CNBC, it lives under the skirt of J.P. Morgan and Goldman Sachs.
Well, he's also the same as the 600-pound man. Put their pictures side by side. They're the same.
Stark raving lunatics promoting non-competition. That's why Asia is eating America's lunch, basically. China and India, they're more innovative. Meanwhile, you got Huffington Post over there, Arianna Huffington. She wrote an editorial that we need to get the innovation started in America again. We're losing out to China and India. Well, get rid of the banking oligarchs. Get rid of Timmy Gangster. Get rid of Jamie Dimon. Why don't you just put John Gotti in there? Why don't you, it's ridiculous. And they get away with saying this stuff in the public. I challenge Jamie Dimon to come on this show and debate me. I challenge you.
Well,
he'll never do it.
Here's a headline from Simon Johnson, the former chief economist for the IMF. Jamie Dimon is the most dangerous man in America. He's talking about Jamie Dimon's letter to the shareholders, which I was just reading a clip of that. He discounts some of the points that Jamie Dimon has said. Big companies need big banks, Jamie Dimon argues. Well, Simon Johnson has said there's no evidence at all a bank having a balance sheet of more than $100 billion adds to society. He's gone through all the numbers and looked at all the banks through the last few decades to see if they actually add anything. He says the fact that JP Morgan's balance sheet is now at $2 trillion and nearing $3 trillion well, that's a big, giant danger to the global economy.
Thanks again, Stacy Herbert, for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with Matt Taibbi.
They've been developing the most powerful and up-to-date weapons. Weapons that could easily destroy the entire planet. The time has come to stop this deadly race. On the threshold of a new treaty. The long path to accord on RT.
All right, welcome back to the Keiser Report. Now it's time to turn to Matt Taibbi, journalist for the Rolling Stone magazine. I think of Matt as the William Shakespeare of the financial collapse. Matt has coined some of the most memorable phrases of the crisis, notably when he referred to Goldman Sachs as, quote, a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity. Matt, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me back on.
Looting Main Street is the title of your latest article in Rolling Stone magazine. Another remarkable piece. Truly, if anyone still has any doubt that America is a mafia-run oligarchy, you got to read this. So, Matt Taibbi, tell us, how did Jefferson County, Alabama, go bust over a sewage system?
Well, it's a long story. It started in the early 90s when the county had a faulty sewer system, and they were sued by a small environmental group, and that suit turned into an EPA lawsuit that forced the county to build a new sewer system, which is something that happens all the time in municipalities around the country. But what happened was the local politicians immediately saw the advantages of being ordered by the federal government to build a fancy new sewer system. And so the same people who had originally fought against this ruling suddenly signed off on an amazingly expensive sewer repair deal. They ended up, the initial estimate for this sewer job was only $250 million. They ended up spending $3 billion on this thing. And what they did is they went to Wall Street and they borrowed a ton of money through municipal bonds. But the real problem started when they had to start refinancing this debt. The debt got out of control. The local politicians didn't want to have to pay for it right away. So they went to Wall Street and they basically asked them to refinance the deal so they could push the problem down the road a few years and let the next group of politicians deal with it. And that's where they got into a lot of problems. They did things with interest rate swaps similar to what we saw in Greece. And the resulting problem was basically eventually the debt swelled to the point where it exploded, and now the county is basically going to be bust for a generation.
Right. So what we see here is kind of a microcosm of what's happening on the global scale. You've got these banking oligarchs. They've infiltrated countries. They've infiltrated economies. They load up folks with incredible amount of debt. And this causes a chain reaction where, at the end of the day, the bankers end up collecting usurious amounts of interest and completely disenfranchising all the local folks who end up basically as debt slaves. Now, how much was the sewage system meant to cost? Or what was it, the sewage system? I read the piece, and in the beginning, the original cost per sewage per month was X, and then it escalated to what?
The average sewer bill for a Jefferson County resident in the mid-'90s was between $10 and $14 a month. By the time I got there about a month and a half ago, most people were paying 300 or 400 times that at least. I met people who had sewer bills as high as $100 a month. So it was, the cost has skyrocketed, and that's only a small part of the problem, though. Yeah, if you remember, the sewer bill going up is only one consequence of what happened to the debt of that county. The major consequence, of course, is that the credit rating of the county was downgraded, and as a result of that, their cost of borrowing skyrocketed. So now, basically, the county can't borrow any money to keep its essential government functions running.
Right. But I think in this piece, what's amazing is, it focuses in on basic utilities of life, like sewage. And it reminds me of what happened in Cochabamba, Bolivia, when basically the Bechtel came in and decided to take control of their water and charge people for their own water, and pretty soon it started to escalate so that people's almost 50 to 60% of their monthly income went to just water. And America has seen this happen in foreign countries. American bankers have done this as part of this American empire, this stealth empire around the world. This is the type of thing they do in other countries. But now they're doing it right in their own country. So, and this is spreading, right? It's happening in municipalities all over America.
That, to me, is what's so amazing about the Jefferson County story. Not only is it, the typically exploitative, taking over of an essential government function, but the bribery aspect of what went on in this county is something we would absolutely expect to see in Indonesia or Nigeria or Russia, where I lived for 10 years. It was not at all a surprise to see what we saw in Jefferson County, which is this. The banks all went to Jefferson County. They wanted to do these fancy deals with the government. So they sought out buddies of the county commissioners, and they paid them millions and millions of dollars, and that money was directly funneled to the politicians, who then signed off on these crappy deals that blew up in the face of the county. And this, we have bankers on tape from J.P. Morgan joking about how they went to the county commissioner and said, just tell us how much, you need to do this deal. And that's the way we do business now in this country. It's really it's no different at all from a typical third world pay for play kind of a scenario. And I think people have to get used to the fact that we no longer have that higher standard.
Right, and you use the word bribe, and you emphasize it bribe, and you use it 3 or 4 times in the same sentence, bribe, bribe, bribe. And you're talking about J.P. Morgan, and they're engaged in obviously fraudulent activity and bribing of local officials. Now, J.P. Morgan, of course, is the other titan of the Wall Street pyramid of fraud, along with the Goldman Sachs. But, J.P. Morgan is now coming into its own, I think. It's entering the Olympics of fraud with this deal. J.P. Morgan, talk a little bit more about how they got involved and some of the banking tricks that they were using.
Well, actually, it's very funny how, it's not really funny when you look at what actually happened, but it's humorous when you look at how J.P. Morgan got into this deal. Basically, the county commissioner was a guy named Larry Langford in Birmingham, Alabama, in that county. And he made an announcement as soon as he got elected that anybody who wanted to have any financial dealings with the county had to go visit his buddy Bill Blount, which basically meant that's who you were going to funnel the bribes to. Now, when he got elected, Goldman Sachs already had their hooks into Bill Blount. They were already planning to do an interest rate swap deal and a new bond auction with Goldman Sachs. J.P. Morgan wanted so badly to do this deal that they went to Blount and made him a counteroffer. And what ended up happening was J.P. Morgan actually paid Goldman Sachs $3 million to back out of the deal. I mean, this is an open and shut anti-competitive behavior. I mean, this is not the kind of thing we're supposed to see happening in a capitalist society. They just forked over $3 million, and they went and they got to fleece Jefferson County all by themselves. And that's how they got into this deal.
Well, who said there's no honor amongst thieves? Now,
right, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Let's talk about this word churn, because anybody who's done any business on Wall Street, and I worked on Wall Street for many years, churning is basically, on the retail level, you have a retail customer and they might have $1 million with you. If the more you turn it over the course of the year, if you can turn that $1 million and reinvest it every week, 2 weeks, or a month, you're making commissions on that. You're churning the account. The fees add up quite dramatically, and that's the way most of the business is done on the retail level. But here you're talking about on the institutional level, talking about J.P. Morgan coming into a municipality, multi-billion-dollar deals, churning this project. Can you get into some of the specifics of how J.P. Morgan was churning their way through massive fee payments to themselves?
Yeah, this is basically a much more gigantic version of something that's probably familiar to a lot of people, which that goes on with mortgages. Say you take out a variable rate mortgage, like an option ARM, and your lender will often say something to you when you buy that house, like, look, obviously this could go up, but if the interest rates go up in a couple of years, you just come back to me and we'll refinance. And that, of course, the rates go up. They come back to the lender. He refinances. Same thing happens a couple of years down the road. They have to refinance again. And every time they refinance to get themselves out of those skyrocketing rates, the lender gets his commissions and his fees, and that's called churning. That's taking this, just what you described, You take the same borrower, but you're making fees on him over and over and over again. And that's what happened with Jefferson County, Alabama. They borrowed $3 billion, but every time they had variable interest rates on some of their bond deals. So every time their debt structure started to go up, Wall Street would come back to them. J.P. Morgan would say, let's do an interest rate swap to lower those, that obligation of yours. And they kept doing it over and over and over again. They did 21 swap deals in Jefferson County. Each one of those generated millions and millions of dollars of fees for all the banks involved. And it wasn't just J.P. Morgan Chase. Bear Stearns was also involved. Everybody made money on these guys by churning these fees. And it was just a larger version of the mortgage scam.
Right, and as you point out in the story, when J.P. Morgan goes in and they talk to the municipality, they sell them on this idea of a credit default swap or an interest rate swap or a derivative as a way to mitigate their risk. And somewhere on page 7, 9, 12, or 14 of the contract is spelled out the conditions that would trigger a refinancing and a re-application of this hedge. And if anyone actually...
cancellation.
Okay, exactly. And so since you're talking about folks in these municipal counties who are not sophisticated enough to actually read through these documents and have nobody really reading through them, they just kind of take the word of the slick Wall Street salesman, the probability of this failing and the need to go churning through these products is virtually guaranteed. So having this knowledge, J.P. Morgan knows that they're going to generate millions of fees because of the fraudulent way in which these contracts are constructed, and they take the future fee from the fraud they just committed and pre-sell that in the futures market to create another whole layer of derivatives based on fraud yet to be committed.
If you divorce yourself from the actual consequences of it, it's brilliant. I mean, it's just as criminal works of art. It's really kind of fascinating to look at, but that's exactly what happened with Jefferson County. I mean, anybody who has a credit card knows if you actually look at your credit card contract, it might be as long as 30 pages long. I mean, I remember talking to Elizabeth Warren in the Congressional Oversight panel, who did this stuff for a living. She's a law professor, and she couldn't figure out the contracts for a simple credit card. So you imagine what the contract looks like for $1 billion swap deal. And what happened to Jefferson County was, they had all these sort of very unsophisticated Southern politicians signing off on these deals. And the big one that they fell into, there was a trap in there that basically said if Jefferson County missed a payment, they could unilaterally cancel the deal. And in canceling the deal, J.P. Morgan was entitled to calculate how much money they would have collected over the course of the 30-year life of those swap deals. And so that happened in 2008. Jefferson County missed a payment, and they woke up a few months later with a bill from J.P. Morgan for $647 million. And so you had here you have a $250 million sewer system that you're paying $647 million on just in penalties for 1 year. So that's where they ended up at the end.
Have any charges been filed against even one banker?
Bankers, no. The SEC has had a judgment against J.P. Morgan. They've canceled that $647 million penalty. They've also imposed $75 million in fines against J.P. Morgan. But criminal penalties, no. This is a consistent part of what the financial crisis is all about. You may get convictions for minor players or politicians. The county commissioner in this case got 15 years. The small town, the investment banker who was like the middleman in these deals, he got 4 years. But nobody from J.P. Morgan went to jail, and nobody who was higher up in the food chain who was approving these deals got criminally penalized. Goldman Sachs, for taking that $3 million to go back out, did not get penalized. And that's the way this stuff works. These guys never go to jail for this stuff.
Right. And, of course, Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan, is the name most mentioned to take over from Tim Geithner to be the United States Treasury Secretary. That's going to do it for this. Matt Taibbi, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks for having me on.
All righty. I'm going to thank my guests, Stacy Herbert and Matt Taibbi. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.